This is Don Mazzella again for Small Business Digest. We have with us Mary Nestor. She's here to talk about what I consider a very important topic, but we're going to let her tell us about it. Mary, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Thank Donald. I'm so happy to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience.
Okay. Well, let's start, Mary, first with telling us a little bit about you personally, then your company, your book, and finally a website.
All right. Well, let's see. I can start out by saying I'm originally from the Midwest. Right now I'm living in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, but I was born and raised in the Midwest, and I'm the youngest of 6 children. There were 5 girls and 1 boy, and that boy was just before me. So I don't know if I was just an afterthought or what, but nice growing up in a big family. None of my sisters were able to go to college, but I was. And so I was the first one, kind of a groundbreaker. And I always wanted to do that. My father was a small business owner, and he also had what my mother would call a real job. And so I think that's where I got my entrepreneurial spirit. I always wanted to have my own business and sort of do my own thing. So after I started going to college, and from some situations about my family life, I had to quit. My father got very ill, and within about 4 or 5 months, I found myself married and winging off to San Francisco with my husband. So lots of changes. That's a story in itself. But we lived in San Francisco for quite a while. My 2 children were born there. I have 2 grown children, and 5 grandchildren right now. But I got a job and worked for a while. But after the second one came along, I was a stay-at-home mom. And my first husband had a very successful corporate business. And so he traveled around, and we got moved around a bit. We went to Maryland, and then we were in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years. So we got a chance to travel around and see the world. But when we came back, I was still staying at home with my kids, and they were probably in the middle school by then. And a friend of mine had a job, and she had just a youngster, and she asked me one day if I would watch the baby for her while she went to work. And I said, sure. It hadn't been that long since I had a little one at home, so I thought I could do that. So she arrived, and she was all dressed up. She was, her hair was all done, and she was ready to go off to the office. And so we were standing at the door, and she handed me this baby. And the baby didn't look very happy. And before she left, she turned and said, "Oh, Mary, the baby has a bad cold, and she's not very happy. So they'll probably cry a lot today, but good luck." And she left. So I had this youngster all day, and I'll tell you what, it was probably the worst day of my life. It had been a long time since I had done that. And by the end of the day, I was sort of standing at the door watching the street to see if she was going to come back finally and pick up this child. And she finally did, and she walked in, and my hair was a mess, and I had Oreo cookies all over me, and the baby had snot running down his face, and just miserable. And she walked up to the door, and there she was, as fresh as she was when she started out that morning. And I looked at her, and to myself, I said, I want to be her. And so that was a big aha for me. I said, this was not, the stay-at-home stuff wasn't for me. So I started my own business. I had a sewing and crafts business at home, but I finally went out into the workforce and started very gradually. And eventually I ended up working for Marriott. This was in Bethesda, Maryland, for Marriott. And I worked my way up from an executive secretary to being a manager in the benefits department in human resources. And I also was able to, at that time, while I was working, and I had 2 teenagers at home, I went to school and finished up my bachelor's degree. So I was working and taking care of the family, and also driving after work down to DC to finally finish up my degree. And I did. And then about 10 days later, my husband got transferred, and we shipped ourselves off to Georgia, to Augusta, Georgia. So lots of changes. I thought I could just go ahead and get right back into a wonderful job and other corporate jobs. I'd worked so hard to finally get my degree. And what a culture shock going from Washington, D.C. all the way down to the South to Georgia. And so anyway, I decided that instead of trying to find another job, I really had this entrepreneurial spirit. I wanted to have my own business again. And so I did. I started my consulting business. I had no clients. I had no contacts. I didn't know anybody in Augusta. I hadn't been there very long. This was in 1992. And so what I did is I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and I met some people. I volunteered to do some projects with the chamber. And I also met a guy that had started a business magazine. And since I was a writer, I had done some writing before, he asked me if I would write a column, which I did. And it was called Quality Matters. And every month there was my column with my face and talking about business and quality and management and customer service. And that really launched my business. And after that, I made lots of contacts. I had lots of clients. And I was doing a lot of consulting work, mainly in process redesign and change management, but I was also doing a lot of training for lots of clients. Great business. And I had a great time. I really loved it. I joined the Rotary Club and got involved in the community. And I think I'm sure a lot of your audience can relate to some of those situations that I'm talking about, because that's how it goes. If you're going to be a business person in a community, you really need to get involved. And I credit the people that I met and the opportunities that I had to start a business from really nowhere and build it up to a business that I'm still working with today. Anyway, I then, as life goes on, I moved to Hilton Head, and I was no longer married. And then 9/11 happened. And, after 9/11, that was a huge, impact on the economy. And since I was doing consulting work and training, a lot of that money, of course, is the first to go in the budget. So I found myself as well, I've got to figure out something to do. So I drew on my background in human resources and benefits, and I landed a job as a HR, human resources director for a resort spa here actually on Daufuskie Island, which is just off the coast of Hilton Head. And a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I absolutely knew almost nothing about human resources, but they were looking for somebody with a training background. And that's another thing I think that is so important if you're in a small business, or you're an entrepreneur, is you've got lots of skills, and you have so many opportunities to develop different kinds of skills when you're on your own, because a lot of things you have to do yourself. And so I was very fortunate. I had some wonderful bosses, but I also had some bumps in the road because I didn't really have much manager experience and training. And so I had some wonderful, wonderful mentors that would take me aside and tell me, you're not really doing this very well, or you're not talking to this person, you're not getting your message across. So I had some wonderful people that helped me, that mentored me along the way. And so, here I am now I'm back in Hilton Head. I've gone through some iterations, as the economy goes up and down. We've had several different times when we've had some corrections, and so I would be working, and then if I wasn't working at a regular job, then I would be also doing my consulting business. So I sort of had two things going at once, kind of like my dad did. He had a job, but he also had his business. And it really suited me very well because it was something that I could fall back on, or if that was my passion at the moment, I could really jump into it. And so over the years, I have worked in different organizations, mostly in hospitality and nonprofits, as a human resources director. And I also continued my business training and speaking. I was attached to some very large organizations for career development. I've done a lot of training and a lot of work with clients doing resumes and that type of thing. So, and I also continued my writing career. So I was doing feature stories for the Savannah Morning News and writing for the internet on different things, which really kept me out there in the working with the community and also getting my name out there. And so I've kind of continued doing all those things. When I was at my last position, it was a nonprofit in Savannah. You know, I really, it really struck me, first of all, my own experience with not really having some of the communication skills that I needed early on to be a manager and to get along with people. And then all of the people, the employees that would come to my office all the time in all kinds of desperate situations because they were stressed out. There was a situation with a coworker or their boss, and they just didn't know what to do about it. And some of them were to the point where they didn't want to work there anymore. You know, and I've heard this before, and it's true that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers because they can't really get along. And it's very stressful, and it could be something very small, but to that person, it can be a big thing when you have to go back to work every single day and you have to deal with this certain person or this situation. And so I really, you know, it really struck me, and that's, you know, my own experience, and then working with so many people that had the same kind of a situation. They needed some help. You know, you need to be able to speak up. How can you find your voice? How can you take a risk to bring up a situation that's bothering you? Or how can you tell someone else that maybe they have a habit or they have a way of approaching people or communicating that's really detrimental to them? And so how do you do that? You know, how, and so was the basis for me writing my book, Say It Now, Say It Right, How to Handle Tough or Tender Conversations.
Okay, stop right there. Do you have the book in front of you?
I do. Here it
Hold it
is.
up.
There we go. It's my book. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, this is it. And, you know, to just start to illustrate, this is a situation that I encountered in my last position, just to kind of illustrate. And I think it really speaks to what's happening now, because people are, you know, we've had the pandemic and we've been away from the office for 15 months. And now we have to come back. A lot of companies are saying come back. And there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to come back. And some of it is monetary, some of it is childcare, but it can be, and I think in some people's minds is, do I really want to go back to that atmosphere anymore, that environment? You know, there were some things that were never resolved before I went, and now I have to go back to it. So I think this Say It Now, Say It Right is so important now, because we're going to be having lots and lots of very tough conversations to get back to whatever the new normal is going to be. But just to give you an example of something that happened to me in my last position, I was a HRD, and my boss was the CFO of the company. And he had a very nice office, and he was a very nice guy. We got along very well. And he had a nice office, but he didn't have any chairs in front of his desk. And he did this deliberately because he didn't want people coming in and sitting down and, you know, taking up all of his time. And that was fine. But when I would come in to have a question or something like that, I would have to stand in front of his desk and talk to him. He would be sitting and I would be standing. And that was fine if it was just a quick question, but sometimes we would get into a long conversation. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'm standing up in front of him and he's sitting down. And that really bothered me. I thought, you know, that's really rude. And he had a table with chairs in his office, and we could have gone and sat down. I just thought it would be very, you know, it would have been nice for him to offer since I'm standing there. And it really bothered me. Now that's a little thing, but you know, sometimes it's the little things that can build over and over again. So I knew that I needed to say something, but I didn't want to just walk in there and say, hey, you know, you're so rude, because that's what you'd like to say, but that is not going to get your message across. So I waited, you know, the first thing was timing. So I waited until he was actually in my office one day. We were talking about other things and we were just having a nice little chit chat. And I just sort of knew this was the opportunity to bring it up. And I said, you know, there's something that's been bothering me, and I really wanted to talk to you about it. Do you mind if I share that with you now? And of course he said, well, sure, what's on your mind? That's one of the tactics, by the way, is you ask permission first. So I told him, and I said, and I sort of explained the situation. And he said, Mary, I had no idea. I don't want people coming and sitting in the office all the time, but I'd be more than happy to move over. And I said, well, if it's just a little conversation, that's fine. But if it's going to be about 5 minutes or so, maybe we could just go over to the table. And everything was fine. I felt so much better. He didn't have any idea that it was bothering me. And from that point on, when I would go into his office, if it was more than a minute or two, he would stand up, we would go over to the table and sit down and have our conversation. So that's just a small example of the kinds of things that I talk about in the book, is how do you handle situations? How do you handle tough situations? You're not happy with your hours. You're not happy with, maybe you're having a problem with a coworker. I had one lady come in one time, and she was very distraught, and she felt that she was being harassed by her boss, and she didn't want anybody to know. She couldn't handle it herself, and it almost came to the point where she just sort of disappeared, and we were very worried about her, and she was very distraught. But anyway, these kinds of things can happen. Situations at work, they can happen with your children. They can happen, if you're in a church group, how all these, you're always interacting with people. And especially now, because like I said, with the going back to work and going back into the workplace, having those kinds of conversations, what are we going to do about work situations? Do you have to come back to work? Do you have to work the way it used to be? And I always would suggest to my clients and individuals who are in that situation is to, instead of trying to put together a lot of new programs right off the bat, sit back and listen. Listen to your employees. Listen to the people, because they're not the same people that left. They're different people. I think we're all different. We have all gone through changes. We've all gone
Mary,
through
let me interrupt you here,
okay.
because we're going to make that the end part of this program. But
Okay.
the funny part about it is I ran into someone I hadn't seen in over 30 years when I worked at Bell Labs recently. And she mentioned to me, we had a boss, we had a mutual boss, who always looked at his fingernails as he talked to you. So it bothered everybody. Well, my solution was one day to tell him if he looked at him one more time, I'd break each of his fingers. Okay, obviously not the right thing to say. It worked. He never did it again. But anyway, I'd like to stop right back up. I agree with you.
Okay.
That's very important that we end this program with, amongst other things, what are the 4 or 5 things you want to leave our audience with in this particular thing. But let's stop and say, I also heard you say you talking to your children, talking to other people. Let's give a couple. Can you give a couple examples of one talking to your children, and then to the other important one, talking to your family?
Okay. Well, I have a chapter in the book, and I marked some of these pages about with your kid. This is chapter 23, and it says, with your kids, I am the boss of you, listen up. And of course, my book is all about having tough conversations. And I have a lot of every chapter has a story, and most of them are from my own children. And I think that's what makes me unique, is that I've lived through this. So I'm sort of the expert since I figured this out. But with your children, I think you have to you talk to your children as if they were I don't want to say adults, but you have to talk to them respectfully. Don't talk down to them. I've never done that. And you just have to tell them what you need, what your family values are, what is and is not tolerated. I always told my kids, and my daughter and I we were headbanging a little bit, And she would say things to me sometimes, and I would say, honey, you can say anything you want to me, but you just have to do it respectfully. You can say anything you want, but you can't yell at me. So you have to set some boundaries, set some parameters, but leave the doors open. Leave the doors open for the children. Another one of my chapters talks about when to stay silent. And I have a story about my son who had an acne problem. We took him to a dermatologist, and he was already 16 or 17 years old. And the doctor would ask a question to my son, and I would answer it. And they would do it again, and I would answer it again. And finally, the doctor looked at me and said, Mrs. Nestor, I think your son can speak for himself. And that's another thing I would tell parents too. As your children are growing up, if you always take care of everything, if you always solve every problem, you always come in and speak for them, what the message you're giving them is, I don't think you can do it. Mm-hmm. I don't trust you to, I don't think you can handle yourself. I don't think you're smart enough to figure this out. And it's a very subtle message, and you have to know your children and know what their age is. But, even from an early age, you give people some responsibility and let them speak for themselves. Let them try to figure it out instead of jumping in all the time. So in that way, then you need to stay silent in those situations.
Well, I have one. A friend of mine has sent me her book that she's just written, and it's a very good book. But the opening is just terrible. It drags. But the real question is, how do you subtly tell somebody you've got to rewrite the lead? As a newsman, that's easy. I've dealt with people, but I've dealt with it for myself. But a lot of people can't do it. How do you handle that?
Well, I think you said you thought it was a great book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and there's just one thing. The opening is drags. So I would start out and I would say, I read your book and I really enjoyed it. I thought the content was great, and pick out a few things that you really liked about the book. And I said, well, there's something that I think could really make it a lot better. And it stuck out to me. Can I share that with you? Would you mind if I shared that with you?
Mm-hmm.
The answer to that question is always yes. I have never gotten a no. And you say, okay, and you could even say now, I'm not being critical, but I've dealt with a lot of authors and read a lot of books. And I think that if you made some changes, it would have such a bigger impact, and your readership would be much bigger, and your message would be much more impactful. All right.
Okay.
And then they go, oh, okay. And then you can come through, and then you don't want to say, well, it really is drags. You see my body language changing? Yeah. And one of the things, I guess the most important thing, I'll put the book up again, is that there are 3 components to effective communication in my book. First is timing. You've got to have the right time. That's the say it now part. And it's not always right now. We blurt things out and it's usually wrong because we say what's kind of in the top of our head. So timing is the first thing. Say it right is all about your body language. You saw how my face changed right away because I was saying something negative. Your tone of voice, it's where you do it. I have several chapters on here on texting and voicemail and that type of thing. This kind of social media and digital communications. And then the last one in the book is your motive. If your motive has to be to lift someone up, all right, to enhance them, to give them a better position. Because if your motive is wrong, and I talk about this in the book, I had a guy one time who was a boss, and he used to pit people against each other just for fun. And he was kind of amused by that. There are people who will say things in meetings just to knock somebody down a notch. This happens. We've all seen it. So if your motive is not pure, if that's, then this, it's never going to be the right time, and it's never going to be the right way.
Well,
So your
they're never
motive.
going to buy your book because they don't care.
Pardon?
They're never going to buy your book because they don't care. The people who would knock you down for the
Exactly. Yeah. But if you want to be, and leaders is so important for leadership, especially like I said, going in, because you're going to have to go back and talk to the same people who are very different in very different situations. And you're going to have to learn how to not just say, I got to make a lot of money, I got to get productivity going, so this is what you have to do, without any benefit for anyone else. So you have to look at it, more holistically, and listen. If I got anything to say, it's please, before you talk and before you make all kinds of new programs, listen to your employees. And you can do that. If they won't talk to you, they can talk to someone like myself. And coaching is so important too in this phase, is to coach your leadership team so that they know how to communicate effectively.
Mary, we only have 2 minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with?
Oh, I think it's, I really love what I do. I really do. And what the most exciting thing is to see someone who if you have had the opportunity to coach someone or to have that conversation with someone else, they are so grateful. Now, they may not be, but a lot of them are. They're grateful to know, because sometimes you don't even know what you're doing. And some little change, some little thing can make your life totally different. I am so grateful to the people that were brave enough to, and sometimes the people that you have to talk to are the ones that are the most combative, or they don't want to listen to you. But they took the risk and they spoke to me, and they told me what I needed to hear. And I'm so grateful for that. I never would be in the position where I am and had the opportunities that I have if someone hadn't stopped me early on and said, one of my bosses told me, Mary, you have the ability to not, people off. And I think about that. He's actually in the dedication of my book, because he made such a huge difference, because then I knew, I didn't know that before. So listen to people. If somebody says, hey, I want to share something with you, say yes. They may have something really important to tell you.
But most people can't take criticism, no matter how careful you are. To my way of thinking, most people can't.
Right. And Donald, that's very true. And in my book, I talk, one of the last chapters is to, you can't, what if they don't react well? And the thing is that you can control certain things. I can control the timing. I can control the setting and my own delivery and my own facial expressions and my motive. The rest is up for grabs.
Yes.
If you have a pure intention, and there's a lot of different kinds of reactions that you can get. Some of them might say, oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you said that to me. Some people might go, who do you think you are? Yes. Some people might say, I gotta think about that. And some people might just turn around and walk away. There's all kinds, and I've got them in the book. There's all kinds of different reactions people are going to have. And you can't control that. But you have to think about, at the end of the day, would this be important? Do I think this is important to say that? And you can just say that. You may not want to hear this, or you may not think it's important, but I feel like this is, something I want to share with you, and you can do with it whatever you please. And you're absolutely right. You can't control that.
Mary, Nestor, your book for one last time.
Yes. My book is Say It Now, Say It Right, How to Handle Tough and Tender Conversations.
Okay. On that note, we have to say thank you, and for an illuminating time. Thank you.